Hello and welcome back to another episode of Cozypreneur. So this episode is part 3 of our mini-series, Showing Up with Clarity. If you missed part 1 and 2, you can go back to the last 2 episodes. It's all about why you feel stuck when you are writing your content and why just be consistent is terrible advice, especially if you have not had the chance or the time to get clear on what your message is. So this episode, I'm going to be walking you through a messaging framework or a content marketing framework that I use, that I teach my clients inside Copy Classroom. And it's something that's going to save you hours of second guessing every time you try to post, email, and show up, because it basically takes this problem of like, hey, every single time I show up, I have to figure out what to say. And instead, it gives you an overarching story that you can pull from. And so no matter where you're showing up or what you're promoting, you're pulling from this same idea, these same core messages, and just tweaking and showing a different side of it every time you post. And that's going to create a lot of cohesiveness for your brand. So before we dive in, if this episode is something that is super interesting to you and you want to build clearer messaging, then get inside Copy Classroom. That is exactly what I help you build in there. So if you want to go deeper on this content, I will see you in there. Welcome back to another episode of the Cozypreneur podcast. If this is your first time listening, Cozypreneur is all about helping you make money and work with the dreamiest of clients. So grab your beverage, get your cozy socks on, and let's dive in. I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that messaging are just words. And I see this a lot, especially with like small business owners in my local community, where they are super excited to get design for their website and they don't really think about the content that's on your website. And what happens is, they are like, either one, I'm just going to write the content myself, or, have ChatGPT do it, or have my designer do it. And what happens is you end up with just words, and you don't end up with like a zoomed out version of what the story you want to tell is. And I think a lot of the times, like when people hear like, okay, you need to think about your brand messaging, you kind of like have this idea like, okay, I know what I do. I know exactly how I help people, but something about like being like so in your business. I used this analogy the other day. It's like you're in a cup and you're trying to tell people about the outside of the cup, but you can't see the outside of the cup because you're so in the cup. Like you're just focused on all the little details inside the cup. So not to say that you can't DIY your messaging, but sometimes it's really hard, right? It's really hard because you're so close to it and you're so like in the details of like, what liquid is inside this cup? How high does it go? I don't know. I think I'm going a little off the rails with this metaphor, but my point is like, when you're thinking about your messaging, it's not just like a really, really well-written sentence. It's not just like, oh, this is a really great tagline, though a tagline is part of your messaging. And it's not necessarily about sounding like you, right? It is because you want to be authentic, but really a messaging framework is the structure behind what you say. It's why you're showing up and what's the message that you are communicating. And no matter where people are interacting with you, they should be able to get this message, right? So no matter if they're on your email list, on your social media. And if we're going to define your messaging, I would say it is the core set of ideas or beliefs or stories that you communicate to your people. And what happens when you have really concrete messaging is that your audience gets a really deep understanding of what you do and why it matters and how you can help them. And that's really like having those core pieces of your message. That's where you're going to really start to build brand awareness, brand loyalty, and you're going to have people coming back over and over. So when you are thinking about your messaging, it's really not just what you say, right? It's more zoomed out. It's like, what's the message? And, you could think about like that Maya Angelou quote of like, it's not what people say, right? It's the way that they make you feel. I think I botched it a little, but you know what I'm talking about. And so that's kind of what your messaging is. It's not the exact words that you're saying. It's like the vibe, the tone. Like if somebody was walking into your store, even if you have a digital store, what is the vibe, right? What's the message that they're going to get? And there's a lot of different ways you can do that visually, but like also with words. The way that I break this down inside my membership is I use the PASP framework. And so the PASP framework is actually built off of a real life copywriting framework called Problem, Agitation, and Solution. And that has been used in copywriting for decades and decades. I don't know, maybe not that many decades. I would have to fact check that. But basically, it looks like this. You start with the problem. What is the problem that your people are going through? What are they really facing? And it's not like, hey, it's not like a random problem. The problem needs to be directly related to what you're offering and what your service is. So you're starting with the problem, and then you're going into an assessment. Why does this problem matter? And this is probably the trickiest part of writing good sales copy, is this assessment piece. Traditionally, the way that I learned it, right, it was problem, agitation, solution. And agitation was about like rubbing a little salt in the wound, like making people like really feel the pain. But like, as somebody who is like super, super empathetic, that felt a little bit icky to me. And I also have gotten this feedback from my clients, like, I don't know, like it feels a little bit icky. So what can we do about it? So the first thing I want to say is, one, you have to talk about the problems. You cannot just jump into the solution. And the reason why is because you need to validate people where they are. And so if somebody is like really, really struggling with, I don't know, their morning routine, right? They're really, really struggling with their morning routine. And you're just talking about like the greatest morning routine ever, and here's how to make your morning routine ever. That's a lost opportunity for you, where like you didn't really take the time to listen and show that you understand what they're going through and you understand where they want to go and how they want to get there. And so talking about the problems and then moving on to the second part of the framework, which I have now dubbed assessment instead of agitation. But assessment is really two things. One, it is talking about why those problems matter. So, hey, you're struggling with your morning routine. What are the bigger impacts of that, right? How is it setting them up for the rest of their day? What is going to happen if they don't make this change, right? And it's not about like making people feel bad again. It's about like, hey, I see where you are, and I've helped clients with this, so I know how to get you from point A to point B, and these are some of the things that I see, right? And so that's also an opportunity for you to develop your expertise and show off your approach and how you do things differently than other people. So when you're talking about your assessment, you're talking about why the problem matters, and you're also talking about beliefs. And so when I say beliefs, what are some of the things that are holding people back? And so for the morning routine example, it can really be like, hey, you don't have to wake up at 5 a.m. to have a good morning routine. Like, and that might literally be like, yes, that's so specific, but it also might be like that this person, your ideal client, is struggling so hard because they feel like a failure because they're trying to wake up at 5 a.m. and they can never do it. And so they feel like it's not even worth putting effort because they can't even get up at 5 a.m. So why should they even plan their morning routine, right? And so, of course, it's like you as the expert, you're seeing that this is where they're struggling. And so when you are doing that assessment, you can really talk about in your copy, in your emails, in your social media, like, hey, 5 a.m. wake up is not the answer to your new morning routine. And then talk about why, right? And when you were talking about that assessment piece, it's really like positioning you as the expert, as somebody that can help because you have seen this problem before. You have helped people solve this problem before. And this is the patterns. These are the patterns that you have noticed while working with these people. Here's what they forgot to consider. Here's a different way to think about things that's going to actually set you up for success. So those are the first two pieces of the framework, which is problem and then assessment, which used to be agitation, but now it's assessment. And then you have solution. And solution is really where you are talking about where they want to go, of course, in relation to their offer. If we're continuing on with our morning routine example, right? So the problem is their morning routine sucks. The assessment is they feel like they have to wake up early, and so they feel like a failure. But the solution is, what if there was a morning routine that worked for you and your schedule, and you didn't have to wake up super early? Like, what if it actually worked with like your sleep rhythms and like the way that you best function? And talk about that and talk about how that's actually possible. And this is actually what I've helped my clients do. And after you talk about that, right? After you talk about what's possible, then you can go into your offer as the vehicle to make that change, right? So you basically are validating their emotions, right? Saying, hey, I get what you have been going through. You're talking about why it matters and what are some of the common like sticky points that hold people back. And then you're talking about what they want. And you're saying, hey, I see the whole picture. I see what you want and I see where you are. And then this is how we're going to get there. And that's really where you start talking about your offer, which is the next part of the framework, product, your product. And the biggest mistake I see is talking about the deliverables, because you're like, oh, there's so much in this offer. It's so good. And you reach out to people and you're like, hey, here's a 5-day challenge for your morning routine. And every day you're going to hop on a 15-minute call, and every day you're going to get a journal prompt. And those are deliverables. But instead, what if you talked about it like, hey, for the next 5 days, you're going to revamp your morning routine. And by the end of the week, you're going to have a morning routine that you feel so good about. And in 3 months, you're going to be wondering why you even struggled with this in the first place, because it's going to be so embedded in your day-to-day life. And I'm not saying like don't include what's in your offer, right? Because, you know, you do have people in your audience who are very curious, like, hey, what are all the deliverables? And I think it does build trust, right? Like, it's going to be shitty if you sign up for something and there's nothing inside, right? But what I am saying is you need to lead with the big promise. What is it that people are actually getting out of your offer? What's right? Like, what's the big promise? So you already talked about it in the solution, right? And so talking about how this offer is the way to get them there. So that basically takes you through problem, assessment, solution, product, and the final one is you/your brand. And so this is really where you are talking about things like your values, your positioning. So like, why you over somebody else who does the same thing as you? And it's really where you get to like, if you're building a personal brand, this is where you can incorporate like those personal stories. If you're not building a personal brand, that's okay too. Your brand still has a presence. Like your brand is a character, and you know, it's going to show up in a specific way and it's going to make people feel a specific way. And so thinking about like, what are some of those stories you can tell? What is the story of the brand? What have you, or, you know, the brand changed over time? What have you learned? What are lessons you've learned? Why do you do things in the way that you do? There's a lot of opportunity to position yourself as the expert of really saying like, hey, I see what those people are doing and I'm doing it differently. And here's why. And it's because of my approach that I do it in this way of X, Y, Z. So if you have never done this before, I would actually like take some time, get your journal out, open a Google Doc, and really think about like, hey, what's the problem that I solve for people? Why does that problem matter? What are the beliefs that hold them back? What do they want? What does it look like when they get what they want? How does my product get them there? And how do I relate to all of this, right? So what's my story? How do I fit in? And if you're not building a personal brand, then it's how does my brand fit in? What is my unique approach that's different from other people? And so when you have all of those pieces, it's not so much about every individual piece of content. even if you did a quick brainstorm, boom, you already have 5 pieces of content, one for each part of that framework. And you can start to repeat and you can start thinking about different lenses. So maybe, if you, for some reason, we're going with this example, if you are a morning routine specialist, I don't even know if those kinds of people exist, but say you're a morning routine specialist and you are talking about, hey, 5 a.m. is not necessarily your ideal wake up time. Maybe you go through this whole process again and you talk about why coffee might not be the best drink for you in the morning, and shift beliefs that like, hey, what if you might actually feel more energized if you had a glass of water before your coffee? And so you can kind of go through it, the same framework over and over with like a different lens, right? All leading back to, this is my offer. This is how my offer helps, right? Like it's all connected. And so when you do have this framework, and if you are like, hey, I need a visual of this because I just rambled on about it for 15 minutes, download the copy rubric below. It has this framework broken down, and it gives you a little bit of idea of how you can assess your own copy and kind of see where are the areas that I need a little bit of work. So when you have all of this, this is really where content becomes a lot easier, because everything you're posting is relating back to that core message, right? It's relating back to that overarching story that you are telling. And so it makes repurposing really easy because, if you are planning out your 5 podcast episodes, take that framework, take those episodes, turn them into 5 emails, turn them into 20 social media posts, right? You can just start to take little pieces and reuse them. And I'm not saying like copy and paste, right? But like you can make small changes to a podcast episode and turn it into a blog post and turn that into an email, and your people will still be with you, right? If you're tweaking it, and it's one of those things where it's like, I think sometimes people worry about being so repetitive, but like if you are saying something on your podcast and then you are saying the same thing on your blog, you're adding depth, right? Because even if somebody listened to the whole podcast episode, and even if the blog is a summary of the podcast episode, not everybody's going to remember everything from the first thing, and they will get more depth and understanding. And also repetition is a really important part of learning. Like if you are actually trying to teach people, like repetition is important. Seeing the same thing with different perspectives is really huge for like creating those neural pathways in your brain. So anyways, the other thing that happens when you have really solid messaging and you're taking everything from like one overarching story is you start to see what's working and what's not, right? And so you can really start to test it out. You're repeating things, you're seeing what's working, you're seeing what's catching traction, and then you can tweak versus like every time you're just like posting a standalone individual thing. Yeah, it's going to give you some information. If it's more of like an experience that you're creating and it's not hitting right, then you can tweak your messaging and then it's going to hit right? Like then you could tweak your messaging and until you're figuring out what's working. And then it's really just like moving with that message, like take that message and fly with it. So if this is something that you are working on, if you want my eyes on your message or your copywriting, specifically emails, blogs, social media posts, then get inside Copy Classroom. It's a great next step so that you can get support with your messaging and your content in a way that's going to help you sign more clients, get more conversions. So with that, thank you so much for listening. The link to Copy Classroom and the link to the free copy rubric is inside. Until next time. That's a wrap on today's episode. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to rate and leave a review on your preferred listening platform. If you haven't, make sure you subscribe for weekly episodes about how to make money and work with the dreamiest of clients without having to get dressed in the morning. Make sure to check out the show notes down below, and I'll see you in the next episode.